Hey, good morning, guys. It is June 10th, and we're still in Luke 11. Chambers is referencing 11:9, which is seek and you shall find. It's the ask and it will be given, seek you'll find, knock and the door will be opened. Um, that passage in Luke 11. And Chambers, obviously, as he normally does, challenges us to make sure that we are asking correctly, seeking correctly, knocking in the right spirit. And so this ye ask and receive not because ye ask amiss. I think that's later. I can't remember where that is exactly, what passage that is. But Chambers says here in the first part, if you ask for things from life instead of from God, you ask amiss. That is, you ask from a desire for self-realization. I'm trying to self-realization. Um, it almost sounds noble. It doesn't sound quite. Sorry, I just need to adjust my chair there. It doesn't sound as as prideful and selfish as we would normally make things sound. But self-realization is one of those things we could almost think is a noble pursuit. Self-realization. It just sounds good, but Chambers is challenging us and saying that if we're asking for self-realization, if we're asking for things from God, then we're asking incorrectly or amiss. The more you realize yourself, because here's his clarification on that. The more you realize yourself, the less you will seek God. It's a really good point, actually. It's one of those things that I think I'm aware of it in music. The more the music speaks of me and my need and my what God does for me, and he gets to this in a minute about. You should read all of it, obviously, but there's this talk about my own experience, and in music sometimes that is a problem. Um, Instead of concentrating on God. And it's the same thing as when we ask. If we're asking with ourselves in mind, then it's we're asking incorrectly. Um, he says down. And by the way, that first paragraph. One of the things I wrote in my margins is we seek God when we are in pain. We seek God when we need solutions that only He has answers to. Solutions to bigger problems, not solutions that can be maybe fixed by um, human solutions. In the second paragraph here, he says, "Beware of building your faith on experience." The metallic note will come in at once. The censorious note, again, Chambers. Um, you can never give another person that which you have found, but you can make him homesick for what you have. Um, so experience is one of those things that sometimes if we're not careful, we relate salvation to our own experience instead of relating it to what the finished work on the cross. Um, my experience indicates this to me about my salvation instead of what salvation truly is. Um, and I received it. And so I I've always thought this was a little bit odd. I've heard in many times no one can refute your testimony. And I don't think that that's a good. I've always felt that it's not a good way to approach the gospel, of sharing my testimony because it's mine and no one can refute it. And I know what Jesus did in my life. And I don't know. You guys can challenge me on this. I just think because God finds everyone and knows everyone where they are, if I present Jesus crucified and the gospel wrapped up in the cross and God's redemptive work through his son, I think everything else then becomes personal to that person. Salvation becomes personal, but I don't know. Anyway, I've always had a problem with that. I've always had a problem with no one can refute your testimony. No one can push back against that. So tell them your story. Well, I think it's valuable. Your story is valuable, but it's not the gospel. Your story is not the gospel. Challenge me on that. Chambers ends with this: humble yourself. It's a humbling business to knock at God's door. You have to knock with the crucified thief. To him that knocketh, it shall be open. And that's the other thing too, is obviously ask, seek, knock is humbling, because it is the admission that I don't have any good answers and God does. Yeah, I don't know. Take today for what it was worth. You guys have a great day.